Employment Relations Employee Remuneration Disclosure Amendment Bill, first reading.
Camilla Belich.
Madam Speaker, I move that the Employment Relations Employee Remuneration Disclosure Amendment Bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Education and Workforce Committee to consider the bill. Madam Speaker, it's an honour to be able to stand here and give the first reading speech on this bill, which has been a long time coming. Madam Speaker, this bill is a small step towards greater transparency in pay. The reason that this is important is that for too long in New Zealand, and indeed around the world, we've had persistent and unexplained discrimination in our pay. And that's especially so for women, and especially so for Māori and Pacific workers. Right. And where there is discrimination, sunlight is often best disinfectant. This bill brings sunlight to pay. Being secretive about pay often fuels gender and ethnic pay gaps and can lead to discrimination. Madam Speaker, the origins of this bill arose out of a briefing that was started under the 53rd Parliament of the Education and Workforce Committee, which I was a member of. And I want to acknowledge members of that committee in the last Parliament who were really pivotal in that particular inquiry, or that particular briefing, including Maya Lubeck, who was our chair of the Education and Workforce Committee during the 53rd Parliament, and also Jan Logie, who did a lot of work in this area and worked closely with me and other members of that committee on that piece of work. Madam Speaker, the committee recommended a mandatory pay transparency regime for large businesses in New Zealand to report gender pay gaps and ethnic pay gaps within their organisations, and there was also strong support for disability pay gaps to be also reported. Another one of the recommendations from that committee was to end pay secrecy, and this is the recommendation that resulted in the bill before us today. There were some other worthy recommendations from that report, such as making pay rates mandatory on job ads, but Madam Speaker, that's perhaps another member's bill for another member's day. So what does this bill do? It does something quite simple. It allows you, and when I say you, Madam Speaker, I mean individuals in New Zealand, to talk about their own pay. It means that people can talk about their own pay without fear of discipline, without fear of action taken by their employer, regardless of what their contract says. And my hope, Madam Speaker, is that it will make taking bigger claims, like pay equity claims and equal pay claims, and it will make it easier for people to do those types of claims, which remedy larger discrimination within the employment system in New Zealand. And it means that conversations about pay can be freely held. Many people in New Zealand might not realise that if you have a clause in your contract that states that you cannot talk about your pay, even talking to your spouse or a family member will technically put you in breach of your contract. Now that's not practical, it's also not just and not fair and not right. And in a bigger sense, it means that conversations about pay, which would lead to discrimination being addressed at an earlier stage, are not happening in New Zealand. So this bill addresses that problem. It provides a small step towards easier conversations, more transparent pay, and I hope less discrimination. Technically, this bill amends the Employment Relations Act 2000. It introduces the term adverse conduct for a remuneration disclosure reason. So if you disclose your own pay or disquire into someone else's pay, and you're then disadvantaged or dismissed as a result of those actions, then you can take a personal grievance under the bill. It's quite simple and it's quite fair. It is an individual's pay and they should be able to talk to their colleagues about it if they wish, and their partner and their family. Importantly, Madam Speaker, this bill does not compel or force anyone to disclose anything about their own pay. It is just the ability for them to be able to share that information voluntarily if they want to. This is important because of our persistent pay gaps in New Zealand, and at the moment the Ministry for Women notes that our gender pay gap in New Zealand is 8.2%. But recently we've had another biennial report by Strategic Pay that looks at pay more widely and also includes things like bonuses, parking allowances and cars to measure the gender pay gap within not only the public sector but also the private sector. And very disappointingly, Madam Speaker, this has shown that the pay gap in the private sector has actually got wider for men and women. So this means that we need to take action. It means that we can't keep doing the same thing that we have been doing to date. And small steps like this, and voting for this bill tonight, and I would ask colleagues around the House to consider doing so, will help to address some of those inequities. All of the literature on this recognises that pay gaps are a complex problem. There isn't one specific clause or one specific reason that gender pay gaps or pay gaps, ethnicity pay gaps, disability pay gaps exist. But a complex problem requires a complex response, and one of those small steps towards addressing it can be supporting this bill. Interestingly, the study conducted by Strategic Pay also found that females were still being paid less than males for the same sized job. This is in New Zealand today. Quite shocking for us to be still facing that. So in relation to people being disciplined for discussing their pay, some people may wonder if this is an issue in New Zealand, and it is. There have been a number of cases which I've been able to find. One was a case called Carr and Baker's Magnum Limited. In this particular case, this particular worker was off work on ACC. He then showed his payslip to another worker and then was called up and reprimanded by his employer for doing so. It wasn't directly as a result well, it's not clear that it was directly as a result of that interaction that his employment ended, but that was the result. So you can see that there is evidence that this occurs in New Zealand. Additionally, the Privacy Commissioner has the following advice on their website, essentially it's a matter of employment law, it's not something covered by the Privacy Act, and it actually says to people if they want to look at discussing their own pay, they should actually get legal advice on that. And that's not the situation we want, Madam Speaker. We want people to be able to talk about their pay and be able to recognise when there's discrepancies in pay without having to get legal advice. A conversation between colleagues should not depend on getting legal advice to be able to talk about something so simple. So that's what this bill would do. Other countries have done this. This is not an unusual type of law to have. Australia has it as part of their Fair Work legislation. Ontario and Canada has a law which prohibits employers from taking reprisals against employees. The United Kingdom has a law banning reprisals for discussing pay if it's about discovering discrimination. 19 states in the United States have this particular prohibition, and the European Union also banned pay secrecy clauses from the 6th of June 2023. It also has support among experts. A very well-known employment lawyer, Susan Hornsby-Gallup, wrote in March 2024 that salary concealment frequently helps only the most skilled employees in negotiation, and pay transparency, on the other hand, requires that each person's compensation be reasonable in light of all the factors. So you can see, Madam Speaker, that this is a needed bill. It's not a bill that is going to fix the fact that we do have gender pay gaps or ethnicity pay gaps or disability pay gaps in New Zealand, but is a strong signal towards continued work and will help with the other laws which remedy discrimination in work. In closing, Madam Speaker, this first reading, I want to acknowledge the work done by the Human Rights Commission, specifically the Pacific Pay Gap Inquiry. There's a lot more information that I could read from this, including a lot of Pacific workers who reflect on working their entire working life on the minimum wage and not feeling that they could ask about their colleagues' pay. So I want to acknowledge especially the outgoing EEO Commissioner, Zoamali Karanina Sumio. I also want to acknowledge her for her advocacy and her particular strength in advocating for the Pacific pay gap to be addressed, and I hope that this bill is one small step. I also want to acknowledge Darwin Stewart and Mind the Gap for their advocacy and support of this bill, and all of the CTU and the Council of Trade Unions for their work in trying to close the gender pay gaps and their work towards pay transparency. Madam Speaker, this is a small bill, but it provides a stepping stone towards further work, which I hope, for the sake of my daughters, this House decides to take.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I don't see any problems with that bill.
I've actually been in a situation where I seek legal advice and I was hit up about it saying you're not allowed to discuss pay rates. And I go, so how am I meant to receive legal advice? And that really opened up a can of worms. So what am I meant to do? Oh, hi, I want to receive legal advice, but I can't give you the information so you can give me an accurate advice. You know, and if I told that to the community law officer, she would have responded with the words of, what's it called? Your employer can't do that.
Yeah, the whole reason for it is because there are some times where they pay people different rates for the same job and they want to get away with it. If you want to make sure that everybody's getting equitable pay rates for doing the same job, then that discussion is the way that you do it. I'm really worried that Joe over there is going to talk to Michelle and Michelle's going to find out that she doesn't get paid as much. Well, the way to fix that is to pay Michelle the same as Joe. It's really basic stuff that feels like it should have been taken care of years ago, and it kind of makes sense that it doesn't. I'm just wondering whether or not we're going to get like Cameron Brewer complaining about, I don't know, how it upsets business owners and annoys them. I actually saw Cameron yesterday at the mall and I avoided him like plague.
Oh, you avoided him? You don't want to have a conversation?
He was there with his kid, and I thought, that's not a fair thing to do.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I think, has National Act or New Zealand First, had announced anything, any opposition or any?
We can go through their speeches. I can tell you it did pass first reading.
Oh, okay. I suspect ACT will be against it because they're.
Oh, we will.
Okay, I won't predict the future here. Let's get to it.